Welcome to How I'd Write, a segment in which I, the Alpha J, take an episode, or more specifically an episode's plot, and reimagine it through my eyes to make it work out better. Please note that this is an opinion and that I do not take many factors into account, such as certain demographics, length, or whatnot. This is merely me stating a concept, not a script or play-by-play explanation, but simply how I would write an episode. So, this is what people voted the most for, huh? Demolition Doofus. The premise goes as so, according to Wikipedia. Mrs. Puff enters SpongeBob into a demolition derby, but SpongeBob's awful driving makes him a superstar. I love how the premise doesn't mention the details that made this such a hated episode. I love how nowhere in the premise does it mention the incompetence of SpongeBob or the malicious intent of Mrs. Puff. A large part of why many people, including me, think that this episode isn't good is because of those two factors. The pacing here was better than many bad SpongeBob episodes, getting straight into the conflict around a minute in. Too bad the conflict includes essentially disabling Mrs. Puff. However, if that's going too far, then we can at least agree that SpongeBob hospitalized her. The idea of SpongeBob being resistant to pain has been done before, just acts flats. Although it does go against certain episodes like the Splinter, but the continuity really isn't the problem. Then when you add that you know SpongeBob isn't going to die, so all this does is force a climax. So add implausible on top of incompetence and malice. This isn't a worse episode, probably not even in the season, but it doesn't help SpongeBob or Mrs. Puff character-wise. Let's not even mention that Mrs. Puff throughout the episode wanted explicitly to hurt SpongeBob. I just want to get into the rewrite. So as per the rules, I cannot change this premise. So let's have the episode start as a regular day at boating school and SpongeBob fails, but no one gets seriously hurt. Maybe the car can be a little dinged up, but nothing serious like in the original episode. Next, let's have Mrs. Puff give SpongeBob another failing notice. You can even play up how many times he's gotten it before, like in this episode. I would have Mrs. Puff have an absurdly large stamp in the shape of SpongeBob's failing papers and stamp it every single time he fails. This time, SpongeBob says that he'll pass, but Mrs. Puff mumbles something. SpongeBob asks, well, what did you just say? And she'll explains that she doesn't believe he'll pass. She does go into a mini rant, and whether it's aggressive or has this sort of feeling of no hope is just personal preference. SpongeBob walks away sad, amp up the sad music, and he'll pass by one of those street poles and check a poster stapled to it. It will have the following written on it. Do you think you're a good driver? Join the demolition derby and prove your chops. Spaces are filling fast. SpongeBob rushes to the back. He explains that he wants to improve as a driver and wants to prove that he is a good driver, thus wanting to join the derby. She doesn't go along with it at first, but he keeps annoying her until she gives in. Mrs. Puff gives him the worst car that she has, and SpongeBob does fix it up before taking it. This can be a reference to this episode, where he was shown fixing a car. Also, he does know the written part of the driver's test, so he'd at least know how to fix it up. Plus, in this episode, there is evidence that it is the wheel that causes the crashes, not the engine. The next day, Mrs. Puff and SpongeBob takes the boat to the derby. Mrs. Puff sits in the stands, hoping for the best, which is probably just SpongeBob getting a concussion or something, or that SpongeBob will win by forfeit. Neither of these things happens, as the Sponge does start out winning despite his terrible driving. I would keep this part the same as SpongeBob driving in the original episode. However, let me emphasize, he's winning because his driving is so terrible that it's good. That's a major difference. I would let him win derby by derby. Mrs. Puff is still surprised at how much success he's gotten, but still doesn't want to believe that he's a good driver or that he will win. He's determined to prove that going into each competition, he's going to come out on top. And for the most part, he does. Somewhere out in the distance is a masked fish. They don't show this fish's face, but this fish is watching from afar, watching SpongeBob win derby by derby. So now we get to the big finale. SpongeBob is ready to go. The masked fish is in a car of their own. The announcer tells the crowd that the mysterious fish is a 5-time winner of the entire series. You can also make it very apparent that the other derby contestant wins a lot by showing the clips of the other derby person winning all the time. The mysterious contender looks over at SpongeBob and gives him the appearance that he has his eyes set on him. The derby goes and the music has to be somewhere either in this atmosphere of a Roman kind of gladiator type of setting, or something really fast-paced and metallic, such as the song in Jellyfishing. So SpongeBob and the masked fish tear up the competition, cleverly avoiding each other. So then it gets down to those two. They build it up with them staring at each other. The masked fish is staring at the sponge with this look of concentration, while SpongeBob blankly smiles back at the fish. They drive towards each other and SpongeBob's car dies down. The masked fish is going at full speed and the sponge does not take it seriously. They cut back and forth from the speeding car and the halted sponge. It builds and builds until SpongeBob takes out bubbles and blows them in the speeding car's general direction. The bubbles would blind the driver and cause the driver to panic and steer around the sponge, crashing and totaling the car. The crowd cheers for him as he wins the series. He's awarded the trophy before the masked fish walks up to him. The fish says in the most serious voice ever, "I stand to be corrected," and pulls off the mask, revealing it to be Mrs. Puff. That way it could be a twist ending that she helped her competition, so you wouldn't think it's her. It would also give the undertone that Mrs. Puff did want to give SpongeBob a taste of his own medicine. But she would stand corrected and congratulate him. She would say that SpongeBob isn't a good driver, but he's good at being a bad driver. Then they would laugh it off as the episode fades to black. So this was actually pretty difficult to write for because of the premise, but I'm really glad that you guys voted for it because it did give me a little bit of a challenge. I do have a card up for the next SpongeBob episode that you would like me to rewrite because I do want to make this somewhat of a series that you guys can vote for, because there's a lot of episodes out there that the SpongeBob community may not like, and I want to see if I can challenge myself to write it better. Anyways, I hope your time was well spent, and Alpha out.